Morning, everybody. Welcome one and all to the Creative Business Design Lab with me, Jessica Abel. And this time out, we're talking about finding and actually talking to high value clients. And we're going to call it How to Get in the Room Where It Happens. And I'm on record saying that most creatives need to be charging more and working with fewer clients. But then the number one question I get is, when I recommend, when I would say like raise your prices, is who would pay that kind of money? Where would I find them? That is bananas crazy. How can you talk about this? So my guest today is Sarah Marie Lacey, who I'm going to bring on here and pin, and I'm going to bring myself on and add pin. There we go. Who is a portrait painter whose ideal clients are people with the kind of cash to drop on 5-figure commissions. In other words, not the kind of people she normally runs with. But in the last few months, as Sarah has gotten very intentional about using relationship marketing, which is marketing that is really built around developing relationships with potential clients. She's met tons of the right people and started to turn her business around. So I want you to get your questions about networking and relationship marketing ready. And ask yourself, what are you wondering about finding the kind of clients you want to work with? I've got some great questions in the queue already, so probably your question is in there. I'm guessing you're going to have that covered. Let me add Lou as a co-host so Lou can handle letting people into the room. Sarah, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
I'm very excited to be here.
I should have handled that intro a little bit more smoothly, but you are amazing. Your story is so cool. And so I'm really, really excited to be able to dive into this with you today. First of all, why don't you just tell people a tiny bit about your background as a painter and sort of where you were like 18 months ago?
So I've been a professional artist for about 15 years now. I've always painted portraits. About 10 years ago, I went off to France. I got myself like a fancy old-fashioned art education, really dove into learning how to paint and draw the figure. Came back to Canada, eventually opened a school. I taught figure painting and portrait painting for 5 years. And then the pandemic hit. And art schools and pandemics are not a fabulous mix. And so I knew I needed a new business model. I've always done portrait painting, but kind of like as a side thing that I loved. I wanted to do more of it. The school was eating my entire life. And so the pandemic in a way was like this blessing in disguise of, okay, I can't run this anymore. It doesn't make any sense. I want to get into portrait painting. But then very quickly realizing that like my previous business model didn't make sense for portrait painting. Because I was just charging too little. So it was fine as like bonus money on top of the money I was making from teaching, but it was not going to sustain me for the number of hours it took me to finish something. I didn't know how to find new clients. People mostly sort of found me by surprise. And about 18 months ago, I was like, I need to change something. Or like, this is just not going to work out. And this is really what I love doing. I kind of got far enough into it that I thought, yes, I like this mix of work better than running a school. Happy to be a little artist hermit most of the time in my studio. But I just needed more strategy. I needed higher pricing. I needed all kinds of things. I needed things I didn't even know I needed. And so it was kind of searching for answers and trying to figure that out.
Which is when we met.
Which is when we met.
Yeah.
And I was like, this person seems to talk a lot about strategy. That's nice. I need that.
Yeah, which I appreciated that from the very beginning, because the first thing we did together was work together in authentic visibility, I think. And then you joined the incubator a year ago. You're one of my pilot students. And there's some other pilot students here as well. So I'm looking forward to getting them into this conversation a little bit later on. The main thing I want to highlight there, though, is like when you had your school, first of all, you very reasonably, because this is how things tend to work, thought to yourself, I imagine, like, school, that's how an artist makes a living, is by teaching stuff, right? And it worked out fine, but it was actually like a ton of work, right? It was just all hours, it was evenings, it was weekends, all this other stuff. And the thing that allowed you to do was to sort of almost dabble in portrait painting. And it didn't matter that much how much you were making. on those
No.
paintings. It was just like, everything felt like, oh, that's so great. I made some money on this, and it didn't, and not until that became the center of your business model was it something like, oh, no, I actually need to deal with this, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And then having deadlines, right? Like before it was like,
Right.
I run a school. If you want me to do this, just know that this is a very flexible timeline. People hired me only because they loved me. Now it's like, no, I actually need to get things finished within a particular timeline for this to be a sustainable business model. It can't just take forever and ever.
Right. And you literally didn't know how long it took you because you were doing it here, there, you were fitting it in different places. Like you didn't have any, you weren't tracking it or whatever. And at this point,
No,
you're like,
not really.
no, this takes me, it's like X hours per square inch or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, it's really pretty scientific at this point, but it took a while to get there.
Yeah.
So that that's the before. So like, as we were meeting, you have clients, you have done some commissions, like, you can do the actual work, but you're like, well, how does this turn into making a living for me? I don't understand how those things connect. Right. And so what we initially did was say, all right, well, first of all, you've got to raise your prices like a lot. And you knew that, it's not like that came as a huge surprise to you, but I think you've actually raised your prices several times since.
Yeah.
Yes. And one of the big questions that's come up in the Q&A that was pre-submitted is this idea of like, how do you sort of figure out what, like, you sort of make those new prices make sense? And I think one of the biggest things we did together in the incubator early on was really work hard on your value proposition. And for anybody who is confused about this term value proposition, what that means is it's basically a phrase, a sentence, a short paragraph that defines what it is that what are the outcomes that you provide to a client, right? What are the things that through the way you work, you get, like, a client will get these outcomes, right? And so for portrait painting, the obvious thing is they get a portrait, right? They get an actual painting. But that's not really where we landed. Can you talk a little bit about what your value prop is and how, like, what that process of evolving that was for you?
That was a huge, it was so important. It was hugely important because I didn't know how to raise my prices because I couldn't figure out, like, why is what am I doing? Why does what I do matter? Why would anyone want to pay more for that? And so really digging into, like, the legacy piece, and that this is like a family heirloom, that this is something that gets passed down through the generations, how meaningful that is for people to have. I hadn't really sat with that or let that sink in up until we started really digging into it, thinking about how different it is from photographs. We get so caught up in, like, photography culture. We all carry around this amazing camera in our phones, in our pockets, but it's made photography in some ways, not photography like artistic photography, but the way that photography lives in our lives, in some ways kind of disposable, right? Like, I've had so many conversations with people about the 7,000 photo camera roll they have. When was the last time you went through it? Do you look at them? You have these hidden memories just all tucked away. Whereas a portrait is commemoration. It takes that memory and makes it tangible. It makes it something really special that lives with you every single day. And I got, like, the most amazing voice memo from a client the other week who had finally seen, like, the high resolution professional photo of the portrait she'd commissioned of her mom. And she was in tears and just, like, summed up so beautifully everything that I've really started to understand and I'm working towards. Because she was like, I got this for my mom and it's surprise for my mom, and that's great. But she was like, I'm not going to have my mom forever. And when she's gone, I will have this, like, physical representation of her. And she's hugely involved in, like, my child, who she's got a new toddler, raising him. So she's like, and then my kid's going to get this too. And my kid's going to have this, like, part of my mother forever. Like, this is part of the family now. And she just, like, she was so moved by it, and it was so important to her. And that summed up for me in ways it was just, it's like, I've been starting to understand it, but hearing her and hearing the emotion in her voice about it really drove home to me, like, okay, what I'm doing is important to people. And I can sit in that value a lot more solidly now than I could have a year and a half ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And it reminds me that one of the ways that we get to the value prop, especially within the incubator, is interviews, right? Like that moment of this person sharing that with you is way after the fact. But right at the beginning, you had some conversations with clients, and it was their language that helped you figure out this part of your value prop, this piece of it. And this part really aligns with the part of your practice that's like family portraits, right? That's
Yes.
about, sort of generational connections and so on, right? So that's one part of your practice. What's your value prop for the other part of your practice, which is kind of what we're focusing on more today in some ways?
Yeah. So where I really want to move into is painting portraits of basically women leaders. They're super underrepresented in terms of portraiture. And that is important because it conveys its legacy on a different scale. It's legacy for community. It's legacy for visibility, for representation. And now I'm losing my words. It's like one of those things I'm like so passionate about. I like cannot find the words for it. But that's really where I want to be moving is making pieces that become part of like the broader cultural narrative and change that broader cultural narrative. Because there are women business leaders, but then they're invisible in this sort of like the visual history, especially in Canada. They're absolutely invisible. So changing that and moving into that space.
Yeah, it's so inspiring. That piece of it is so inspiring. And what's interesting is that piece came from you. That didn't really come from interviews and things because you didn't know those people yet. And then, but part of the arc that's happened is you going and finding people to interview, right? So that actually in some ways was the thing that opened the door to what we're going to be talking about in a little bit about like what you're doing now is like literally going out and saying like, I'm interested in this. I'd love to talk to you about this. Not I'm trying to sell you a painting, but I want to find out your feelings about representation of women in government and business, that representation and how, what that means in terms of power structures and all kinds of other things. And you found a lot of people who really did want to talk about it at that point. But you had to sort of start with your own mission. So there's two different things. One came out of like, this is from the people who already had the portraits and the way they felt. And this was like, and this is my interest and passion, which came out of your work as an artist, painting portraits, not for commissions, but just your own body of work of underrepresented people, and like being really paying attention to the beauty in everyone. That was like part of your artistic vision, is part of your artistic vision as in your private practice.
Yes. So finding a way to marry those two things. And then when I started saying to women like, hey, this is what I'm noticing. What do you think? And then they're going, oh, hey, I've never noticed that before. And I'm starting to have people come back to me and say like, I've been really thinking about that since our last conversation. Like I'd never considered this piece before. Or, last Thursday we'll get to me in the club, but talking to someone at the club, and she was like, all of the portraits in here are of men. How do we, like, can we get some portraits of women in here? Like, what can we do?
Right. Exactly. And once you see that gap, and there's like a huge gap in the market there, you can head right into that gap. And we were talking the other day about the literal halls of power, like how, the hall is like the hall of power with all the people of power, and they're all men and mostly white men, so that trying to change that representation that can feel very mission driven, and having some sense of like a flag that people can, rally around, that clients can rally around, is so powerful as a value proposition. And so it's so easy to talk to people when you have that kind of mission, because you don't have to talk about it in terms of like, hey, can I sell you a portrait? You're talking about, hey, do we have a shared mission here? And that's just going to get them interested in working with you without you having to sell anything. That's the beauty of relationship marketing.
Yes. Or even just people who are getting on board. They're like, hey, I'm not that person, I'm not the person you're looking for, but I so believe in what you're doing. I want to talk you up to everybody who I know who is in that position.
Yep.
Which is also really important and helpful.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's what's happening this is like now, I would say 10 months ago or something like that. We're working on this value proposition. You're creating language to use both verbally, but also like on a sales page for information and so on. And at the same time, you're doing some portraits. You have your first step was to actually go back to existing clients and to your mailing list and say, I'm open for business. Anybody need a portrait, essentially, right?
Yep.
So you didn't have to go to strangers. You didn't have to go to people who you didn't know would, be supportive, but you did have to say, hey, listen, this is happening. Can you talk about that little piece, that first step?
Yeah. I mean, that was scary. I've never gone back to previous clients and been like, hey, could you talk about me to other people? And what I found was interesting is, I mean, most people responded in the like, of course, I will absolutely like mention you to anyone. But I actually ended up getting repeat commissions, which was not even what I was asking for. That I got 3 more commissions out of that. I had some commissions from people who had been already kind of thinking about it come to fruition just from saying like, hey, are you ready to do this? Do you actually want to do this? Can we have a proper conversation about it? Having that then turn into actual commissions. And so in the end, like I ended up booking out my whole year of portraits way earlier on than I have ever done before. It was terrifying, but worked. I was highly skeptical, and then it worked. Yeah,
it did work. It worked better than it works for most people. I mean, to be totally fair, like that doesn't always work to that level. I mean, you had a lot of pent up desire for what you do. And that's fantastic that it did work. But one of the downsides of that is you were working with people you'd worked with before, and you felt like I need to give them sort of like a alumni price, and you kind of underpriced yourself for a while and got yourself into a bit of a pinch, right?
Yeah. So I definitely I priced things higher. But I gave them probably, I think it was a 30% discount on my new prices. Turns out one of them could have, I didn't know, someone told me later, absolutely could have paid full price. But, live and you learn. But yeah, that was when I realized like, oh, I really, really need to put my prices up to 5 figures to be able to be breaking even, unless it's a very small painting that it just takes me so long. The cost of materials has gone up, especially over the last year or so. But it's 100 hours minimum. There's just no other way around it.
Right.
And I mean, yeah.
That's what it takes, right?
It's what it takes.
And you do drawn portraits. You'll do pencil portraits, and those are potentially a stepping stone. Like you have created a second offer, which we can talk about in a little bit, where like it could be a stepping stone to like a larger portrait.
I think
commission.
so.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be my entry level, and they're much faster. Like they're 3 to 20 hours instead of like 100+ hours. So,
exactly. Yeah.
Or that more affordable price point.
And you tracked your time, and you're like, it is 100 hours. And if it's 100 hours, I know I need to make this amount of money. Like you did the math. You said like, this is the amount of money I need to be making. This is the amount of time these things take. This is the amount of time I have in my week. Boom. This is the pricing. This is my minimum starting level. Right.
Yes.
So then you're like, 5 figures. Where the hell am I going to find those people? So we were brainstorming a lot, and I don't necessarily have the answers specifically, especially not in Ottawa. Like where are they literally in Ottawa? I don't know. But we talked a lot about events and parties. I remember you were talking about like trying to partner with like, event organizers potentially. And I think you went to a couple events along those lines. Did you not? Something like you did demos or?
Yeah. Where I started was just finding starting to go to the Board of Trade events. So like Chamber of Commerce, Board of Trade, because I thought, okay, if I'm going to meet these people and build an actual relationship where they'd want to work with me, I need to at least like physically show up in the same room. I ended up never quite connecting with an events organizer or anything like that. Any sort of demos I've done were actually invitation through some of the local arts organizations here. And that was much more related to my previous teaching career as opposed to getting portraits. But I started planting seeds to do in-person stuff and looking into spaces where I could go and do that. But my first step was to just like start meeting people outside of my own circle that I knew, like who I knew already were not going to get me any further. Like I'd maxed out who I knew in the city. Again, because it was so based on my teaching career.
How did you pick an event to go to initially? And like, how did you approach that?
My first event was like kismet almost. My best friend is an interior designer in the city. And so she is very plugged into like networking events and stuff like that. And so she forwarded me this email. She was like, look, like the Board of Trade is hosting a wine, women and wisdom night. And it's like, you know, the CEO of the National Gallery is speaking. And this seems like a place where you could meet some people. And I was like, yeah, that seems like the thing. It was not a cheap ticket. That was like the most I'd ever spent on anything. Had nothing to wear, literally had to go buy a new wardrobe. I spent a lot of this year improving my wardrobe. And I mean, walked in literally not knowing a soul. I did not know a single person at this event. And I don't know, there were 20 tables of 8.
All right.
So it was a lot of
you were seated at a table. So you had like sort of an automatic introduction to 7 other people. Is that?
There was like an hour of networking beforehand. You got your glass of wine or whatever you wanted. And then you'd get sat at your table, and then there would be, you'd eat for a bit and network at your table. And then there would be an actual panel with questions and things. So yeah, that first hour was like a little bit nerve-wracking. But it's not the first time I've walked into a room full of strangers, because I have moved a lot and had to like figure out how to make friends with strangers in new cities. Mm-hmm. And my strategy is to always find the other person standing alone.
Okay, that's a good one. I like that.
Because then you're 2 people standing together and you look like you know someone. And then you become like the blob and you find all the other people standing alone and you just absorb them into your group. and you stand like a croissant, not like a donut.
Okay, I love that.
So, because if you're a donut, you're closed off and no one feels like they can come over and talk to you or introduce themselves. And it's a networking event. You were supposed to talk to other people. Whereas if you make sure there's space, sometimes people are walking by, you can catch someone's eye, you can invite them in. I always, especially at like, you know, women focused events, I just started by complimenting people. Like if I saw someone wearing a cool pair of earrings, I would just stop and be like, your earrings are awesome, by the way. Hi, I'm Sarah. I don't know anybody. I was always really upfront that I didn't know anybody. Because they'll take pity on you. And it works. So between like finding other people standing alone and like I have actually built long-term relationships just by finding the other person who's standing alone and being like, hey, I'm also here alone. Like, who do you know? Sometimes they know people who aren't showing up for another half hour. Then you get to meet all those people, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone is always grateful if you save them from standing alone.
Yes, I love that. Such a good technique. I love it. I'm totally keeping that. The other thing I've heard about networking events in terms of like introducing yourself to people and talking to people in a way that's actually gets a little further is that if you come up with a sort of opening question that isn't, what do you do? You know,
yeah,
something like, what's the best, you know, TV show you've seen in the last month? You know, just something that people will have some answer to, or be like, oh, okay. And then you learn a little bit about them and you have this opportunity to kind of get to know them as people a little bit, but you're not like, all right, what do you do? Here's your, you know, let's exchange cards. Boom, boom. I'm on, you know, it's not as transactional.
Yeah. I'm going to have to remember that, because most people do just open with what you do. Although I do try to direct the conversation to like, especially in Ottawa, it's, are you from Ottawa? Because most people aren't. It's a very transplant city. so where are you from? Like, what brought you here? Like, how did you, what do you do for fun? What's your favorite, finding out like what their favorite. Ottawa is one of those cities where nothing is Googleable and you have to know someone who knows someone. So like asking like, what's your favorite restaurant? Because like, it's much more likely to get a good recommendation from a person than the internet.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
finding those ways to just like talk about other things.
Yeah. And it's not that you can't talk about, you can't or shouldn't talk about your work, but that if that's what you lead in with, it sort of like limits the scope of your conversation.
Yeah.
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 Korja asks, what is your elevator pitch? Do you have a way of like, when somebody's like, well, what do you do? Like, what do you say?
Honestly, I used to have like a fancier, like a proper elevator pitch, like most people have. Now I'm a portrait painter. And because I'm the first portrait painter they've ever met, that is sufficient. People are like, what? That's what you do? That's so cool. Do a million questions about art now?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So
I used to work with, I'm a cartoonist. Like that was the same thing.
Don't need it. Like if I try to say anything else, I kind of watch their eyes glaze over because like they're so stuck on the first thing, which is great. But then they want to like, how does that work? How did you get there? What kinds of portraits do you do? And I kind of let them then direct the conversation and figure out like what excites them about portrait painting. What do they find interesting? And then it's tailored to them in a way. It's like an elevator pitch for every single person I meet.
Yeah. And you're always going to find opportunities to put your value proposition into the conversation. There's always a way.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how did you get into that? Well, I really believe in, representation. Like I really want to see representation of women and underrepresented people improve in the portrait world. Like that's a thing that could come up in the conversation pretty naturally.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I often say like my secret dream, you want to know what my secret dream is? And everyone always wants to know what your secret dream is. So that works a lot as well because it gets people. Yeah. It's very easy to bring up talking about the kind because people often ask who hires you. Right? Because
you do.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, people like you hire me. Like, I don't know, it's a really like broad range of different kinds of people. And then it's very easy to say like the kind of people I love working with are
exactly
the kinds of things I want to do. And it depends on who I'm talking to as well, that some people I know aren't going to be a client, but they're extremely well-connected people, people within journalism and PR and communications where they know which door I should be knocking on to be speaking to the person who's going to hire me. So my pitch will change depending on who my audience is as well.
For sure. Yeah. And I do think that there's a huge value in being able to describe who you work with, because if you can do it in such a way that people are like, oh, like it cracks up and like, oh, that's like me. Oh, I mean, that's, and sort of like they can include themselves into this group, even if they've never thought about having a portrait done before, they start to go, oh no, that's actually something that it could be my thing. Like I could deserve that, because it is something that feels like people, it's like a aspirational.
Yes. Thing. Yeah. Just telling the stories behind like, not even necessarily like who is the person, but like, so-and-so commissioned this of their kids right before their son and daughter-in-law right before their first child, or got it of their mother for their 60th or of their grandma for their 90th. Like, and then people go, well, I have a grandma who's turning 90. I have a grandfather who's turning 90. I have a wife. I have a husband. I have children. Like, they just start thinking like, oh, these are scenarios in my life. That's not completely like out of this world.
Right.
And it helps them put themselves in the shoes of someone who gets a commission.
Right. That's not something on a totally different class level from me. In other words, it's like, this is something that people like me do. People like us hire portrait painters.
Yes, exactly.
Which is very important. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions because we have really good questions. But so I want you to tell the story of the Rideau Club. So the Rideau Club is the most exclusive private club in Ottawa.
It's the only private club in Ottawa.
Well, by default then, but it is an exclusive club. Like it is a club that you have to pay for membership and, all this other stuff. You are now a member.
I am now a member.
You're now a full member. So
Yes.
This is not something that a year ago was on your radar at all, like at all.
It was a pipe dream. I knew it existed. I'd been friends with the former master sommelier there, but I was like, whatever, like that's
I could work as a waiter there, I guess, like
exactly. Like maybe one day I could meet someone who might take me. I don't know who are even the people who go there. So it seemed like a great thing, but I was like, it was a total pipe dream. Could not figure out how to even get in the door. And
so as the very first thing, like the very first way that you got in the door, what was that?
I had gone to another Board of Trade networking event. You and I had been having conversations about putting my prices up and finding the right people. And this event was, it featured like the CEO of the year. It was a female CEO. I thought, okay, let's go and just start telling people I want high-end commissions. Because especially the people who work for the Board of Trade, they want to help you figure out where you need to be. And so I said this to someone and she was like, well, you need to join the Rito Club. And I was like, that's a nice fantasy. What? How do I even? And she was like, well, like one of my other Board of Trade members, one of the other employees here, like she's a member, she could answer questions for you. She points to a woman on the other side of the room. And I was like, oh, I definitely made friends with her in the alcohol line already. Cool. I will go and keep talking to her. So I went back and I said, like, hey, like I've been told I should join the Rito Club. I don't know anything about it. You are apparently a member. Help? Like what? Where do we go from here? And she was like, absolutely, like happy to answer any questions. Connected with her on LinkedIn. And she sent one message like on a Sunday morning being like, great to meet you. Happy to answer any questions you have. 6 hours later, sent a second message saying, actually, I'm hosting an event there tomorrow night. Do you want to come? Sure. Gonna need to buy new shoes though, because there's a dress code and my shoes do not fit that dress code. So went the next evening. It was a fairly small event. We had so it was like a municipal election watch party. And I went over to speak to her. And she was like, right, well, I'm actually running this event. I can't really sit and talk to you. Here's some people. Like threw me into the deep end. But it was the friendliest group of women. I could not get over it. They all like came over and introduced themselves to me. They were like, oh, we don't recognize you. You're new here. What do you do? So excited that I was a portrait painter. One woman who is the most well-connected woman, I think, in all of Ottawa, grabbed my arm and was like, you're not a member and you don't have a drink. Come with me. Stuck me on her tab for the night, started introducing people to me, like just started being like, this is a portrait painter. You should hire her. And I was like, you haven't even seen my work yet. Okay, thanks. Is the kind of person who is trying to lift up everybody around her. And that was the beginning of a whirlwind. I started getting comped tickets to other events because people had met me and they were like, cool, you're a portrait painter. Like you should come to this lunch at the Chateau Laurier ballroom on Friday. I'll comp you a ticket. Okay, sure. So suddenly started eating ballrooms more than I ever have in my entire life. I had to buy more clothes. Ongoing theme is, oh my God, I can't wear the same thing every single time. Someone is going to start noticing, kind of need to buy some more clothes. And it kind of, it evolved from there. But there did reach that certain point where I had to decide, like, am I joining or what? And I'm under 40. So they have under 40 pricing at the club. It was a lot more affordable. Not cheap, more affordable. And there's like an entry fee. Like it was a big investment. And it's a 2-month process to become a member because you have to get through like 5 rounds of approval. So I started at the beginning of December, and I finally got approved like last Friday. There's like a lunch, they're like, you get vetted by people. It was a whole thing. And it was really scary making that decision. I will not pretend that I like walked into that bravely. I spent probably 3 weeks waffling over it between like the beginning of November and then like actually pulling the trigger and saying, okay, like, let's book this. I had to accept help from people, like, I won't lie, my dad stepped up and was like, I can help you with some of that because this seems like a good step for your career. And then figured out how to finance the rest of it myself. They let you pay monthly. God bless them. That helps. But also weighing the pros and cons that, like, the alternative was advertising in the like local luxury magazine. There's sort of like a high-end magazine. One like quarter page ad is almost $2,000. That is comparable to a membership. So I thought, okay, this is going to actually get me in the room. And I've committed to 2 years there before I decide whether this is working or not, because I have a really long sales cycle. Like, my sales cycle is like 6 to 12 months between meeting someone and then hiring me. So I'm giving myself lots of time to make connections and to be in the room over and over and over again. They have lots of networking events. Like, every Thursday there's networking. There's like women's night once a month. So there's lots of opportunities to maximize my membership, and I will be everywhere. They're not going to remember a world without me shortly. I am making the most of every cent that I'm spending. But yeah, it was a real journey, and it took a lot of shifting my internal identity to feel comfortable showing up in that space. My grandfather was a bank manager with the Bank of England. And so definitely like upper middle class. He was extremely posh. By the time I was 7, I knew like which cutlery to use if I was at a large dinner table, right? That was very important to him, that like I know how to use the cutlery properly and fold a napkin and all this stuff. And so I kind of called on that a little bit, that like, okay, my grandfather would feel very comfortable in this space. There's no reason why I shouldn't feel comfortable in the space. And frankly, my grandfather probably would have been like, it's nice for colonials. I'll be honest about that. Like, for the colonials, this is quite nice. So I've kind of called on that a little bit to just like, I can belong here. I'm allowed to belong here.
I love that. And yeah. And I want to push back at your statement that you didn't go into this bravely, because you did, because it actually required an enormous amount of courage to walk into this commitment and believe, which I also, because it hasn't turned into money yet, right? Nope. I believe that this is going to pay off like in, multiples and exponentially. This is going to be really, really pivotal for you, especially as we talked about initially, like you are getting 5-figure commissions for family portraits. Like you are doing really well with your portrait business on that side, but the business portraits, the CEO, the government portraits haven't quite kicked off yet. And we knew this would take a while because you have to get everybody thinking about your mission, right? Yes. And the other thing is like your grandfather had that position, but you have learned throughout your life that being an artist is not a real job, that, you shouldn't expect success, and anything you got was like, you should be happy for any crumbs that get tossed to you. And so I don't want you to overplay either that you have this privilege in your background, because your actual journey as an artist has been, just doing enormous amount of work to shed that burden of feeling like you don't deserve this, or that it's not real, or that it isn't an actual job, or that you're not good at it, or, not good at being, having this be your career. Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's been a huge thing of just letting myself have that identity of I am an artist. This is a real job. This is actual work. I am allowed to make money. I am allowed to succeed and thrive at this. And that I refuse to make myself small anymore to fit a overarching cultural stereotype of what being an artist means. I'm allowed to succeed. I'm allowed to live comfortably. And I'm going to charge the prices. Like, I'm feeling less and less apologetic about my prices. I'm feeling more and more able to say, like, they start at 10,000.
Yeah.
That's the ticket to entry, because I work extremely hard at this. I'm very good at what I do. I have a $90,000 art education. Like, somebody pay me money for that. Like, I've worked really hard to get here. I've logged those hours. My work is worth what I'm charging.
Yeah. And more, because I think the key word here is start at 10,000.
Yes. Yes. I'm still getting comfortable with the start at. I'm making myself say it. Still figuring out how to actually then give that
step by step. All right. Before we go to Q&A, I want you to tell one last little story, which is, tell me about the ambassador.
Oh, yeah, that was funny. It was my very first night at the Rito Club, and I was standing with all of these women, and I'd just been introduced to the ambassador of Panama, and she pulls out her phone. She was like, yeah, there were various things about having multiple phones. And she was like, look, I don't have LinkedIn on this phone, but can I get everyone's number? And so she gets one woman's number, the very well-connected woman. And then she turns to me, and I was like, oh, do you need help with your phone? Because I just assumed I'm the young person in the group. I'm nobody. I don't even know how I got in this room right now. And she was like, no, I want your phone number. And I was like, sure. Sure, you can have my phone number. I'm somebody just because I happen to be standing with these other women who are somebody. I ended up seeing her at one of my comped ballroom lunches later in the week, and she gave me a hug, and she was like, how's your cat? And I was like, wow, lady, you are good at your job. You remembered who I am, that I have a cat. I saw her the other day at a dinner party I crashed, because that's a thing I do now. And I was like, okay. That was right after I introduced myself to the UK High Commissioner. It was just at the dinner party I crashed.
I love it. I just love it. I mean, just, once this is the, do something really hard and just don't die. And it becomes easier. The first time you do something, you're just like, oh, I'm going to actually literally die. But then you do it and you're like, oh,
I didn't die.
Alive. I guess I can do that now. Right. And that's how you build, when we talk about courage before confidence, that's what it is, right? Walk in with courage, and then the confidence will come as a result of that. The stuff you're able to do right now, 6 months ago, if I told you you're going to be doing this,
I would have laughed hysterically for a solid 15 minutes. You couldn't have gotten a word in. Just impossible. And now I'm going to go, because part of the benefit of the Rito Club is you can go and work there. So after this, I'm going to go spend the afternoon working there. I've got to write emails somewhere. I might as well write them in a leather chair. Somebody brings me tea.
I love it. Yes.
But couldn't even imagine that, right?
Yeah. No,
impossible 6 months ago.
And really, and the other thing that I want to bring back to everybody here is that this has been step by step. Now, there have been some amazing lucky breaks, but one of the things that has happened is you've noticed the people are really kind, and they're really generous, and they're really interested in you. And so as artists and creatives, remember that what you do is really interesting to most people in the world. Just talk about what you do, and people are like, what? Really? What? How? And want to have that conversation with you. You bring spice to a very boring room sometimes.
Right. Everyone else is just some form of government consultant or in PR, in communications. And that's all very cool. But I am a complete outlier. I'm the only artist and the only portrait painter at that club. And so by default, I'm often a very interesting person. My stories are very different to their stories.
And they'll tell people about you too. They'll be like, hey, I met this portrait painter. Can you believe it? She did this and that. And, and be able to talk about that. And especially when your value prop is very clear, people can then convey your value prop to other people. This is why she's so interesting. And that's one of the great values of having a very strong and very clear value proposition, is that those are the words you give people to explain who you are to other people. That's how that works.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, yay you. I'm so excited.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see what happens. I know it's going to be really just interesting and cool and come up with great things. So let's take a few minutes to look at our awesome questions. And
Mhm.
there's some very good ones here. I want to start with Rowney's question, which you have seen
Mhm.
already, and I think it's
Mhm.
a really good one. Is in what way do you feel a gap between you and your potential clients? Meaning like a class gap. We sort of touched on this a little bit, or some
Yeah.
sense of like not necessarily belonging, or also sometimes I think for artists and creatives, writers and writers, is like this feeling of almost like resentment of people who have money and feeling like,
Mhm.
you know, their problems aren't real, their problems aren't my problem, you know, like it's different, right? Combat feeling, how do you prepare for being in the room and combat feelings of not belonging there?
Yeah, they do come up. I mean, I have to actually stop myself from comparing. Like when someone is standing next to me with like their Yves Saint Laurent bag, like I have to be like, right, I spent $40 on mine at Bentley. It's it's not leather. But it looks cute. So yeah, I do have to kind of like not compare myself. Um, but then I do try to just remind myself they're also just people. Um, that sometimes I just have to boost myself. I've done interesting things. I am equally accomplished, just in a very different kind of way.
Mhm.
That I'm no one's inferior. And just because they have money, like money is only one thing. Um, and I think it's really just trying to, when I'm in conversation with someone, focusing on the fact that they are just another person, like just bringing it right down to like, I'm just trying to connect with one other person here. It doesn't matter what they're wearing. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter how much money they have in their bank account. Like, how can I connect with this person on a really human level? And that's when I've started to discover people, like I was talking to a woman the other week who didn't bat an eyelid at my 10K plus prices, but also was like, I only shop at Reitman's, which Canadians will know what I'm talking about, but it's just, I don't know, it's like JC Penney. She's like, I refuse to spend more than that on clothing, right? Like, so finding people like that, it's a very varied room, and that my assumptions probably don't stand up actually.
Mhm.
And so questioning my own assumptions about what it means to have more money than me. And
Mhm.
yeah, just questioning my assumptions constantly, and then trying to focus on like, this is just another person. We've probably watched the same shows on Netflix. Like, there's probably a lot of parallels here that like, if I just focus on the money piece, I'm going to miss that. Yeah,
Yeah. The other thing
but it's hard.
I've talked with Rowney about. Rowney is also in the incubator and has a similar profile for her ideal
Mhm.
client that from with you. She's a silversmith. Is this idea of like, people in this kind of club, rich people, they have problems that you can solve, right? Like one of the
Mhm.
problems you solve for people with, the means is how do I properly commemorate something that's really important? And Rowney does the same thing, creating things like,
Mhm.
trophies or various
Mhm.
kinds of silver pieces that are commemorative, of very specific kinds
Mhm.
of life events.
Mhm.
Um, and that problem of like, how do you buy a gift for somebody who has all the money and,
Mhm.
buying something expensive is not special.
Yeah.
So how do you do something? How do you actually make that special? How do you show your care for somebody? Like that is one of the kinds of problems that, are very, I think, very vivid and very strong for people who have a lot of
Mhm.
money.
Yeah. Yeah. That like, what do you buy for someone who's already bought themselves everything they want?
Right.
And
And
most
can.
people and can't. And most
Yeah.
people won't commission a portrait of themselves, but are
Hmm.
always delighted when someone else commissions a portrait of them.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
it's like, you're saying, I believe you are art. I believe you are worthy of being art. Like what's, hard to top that as a compliment and a
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it does
Yeah.
solve that problem.
Right.
Meaningful gift giving.
Very much so.
Mhm.
Mary has a question which is somewhat related to this, which is how do you connect to wealthy clients or with wealthy clients if you don't have wealthy friends? Now, you've demonstrated how you've done that, but your initial steps, let's go back to what the initial steps were. Initially, you didn't know anybody at all in this circle. Not that none of your clients have money, so a few of them do. but
Yeah.
they weren't,
Not locally.
they aren't local, and they weren't in
Mhm.
this like women business leaders group that you wanted to be involved in. So
Mm-mm.
that was a whole new market for you.
Mhm.
And you just, we talked about these networking tips, right? Like just showed up there, right?
I
Showed up
just
in
showed
that.
up
Yeah.
and felt really uncomfortable for a brief period of time. Um, and then figured out like how to talk to strangers,
Hmm.
and start building those connections and build friendships, that not just for business. I think that that's been part of it, is not thinking of people as like just a stepping stone to somebody else, but building like actually meaningful, memorable, useful relationships. Sometimes I meet someone and our worlds might be very different, but I've stumbled upon something that would be useful to them. I send it to them, connect them with that piece of information.
Hmm.
Um, so building those kinds of, even if they're more professional, kind of being useful to people so that people think of you as like someone who is useful.
Good to know, right?
Good to know.
Fun
Yeah, a
to
good
know and good to
connector.
know, useful to know. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And to
Exactly.
go back one step before that, that was when our
Mhm.
brainstorming phase where we're like, where are these people? And we really had to think
Yeah.
about like literally, where are they? And that's step one
Yeah.
in terms of meeting groups of people you don't already know, is like
Yeah.
brainstorming, okay, where do they hang out together? So there's enough of them that like I'll meet some
Mhm.
people who are cool, who are interesting and who
Yep.
want to be connected with me, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
depending on the area you work in, what kind of work you do, it's going to be different.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
But I
exactly.
think starting with your local, if you are looking to get outside of your own sort of bubble, starting with your local board of trade is probably a pretty good place to start, in that even if you just go to one event, they will know where you should go. Like they're a great resource in that sense, because their job is to know where different factions are all hanging out. So you could at least get that information and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Got a couple questions here that are sort of similar. And I've got one from Bethany, which is what if your audience isn't used to high ticket offers? Bethany is a book coach and an editor, and most of the writers she's talked to state that they either can't afford 4 figures or higher, or that since there's no guarantee they'll be published, and they don't want to pay
Okay.
that. And then I have another question from let's see, Mary, how do I get high paying ghostwriting gigs? Um, and Jennifer about getting higher end wedding photography. So the answer for all of
Mm.
these is your value prop, basically, like making that, going through that process of really figuring it out. So like if you have clients who are like, what I want is to be published, and you can't, I mean, nobody can guarantee publishing unless you're a publisher, right? Like that's not something that you can promise as an outcome. You need to be finding out what outcomes can you actually deliver consistently, and then putting that is your value prop. And then you find clients who want that, the people who want to be published and all they want is to be published, and they don't want to go through the work of whatever else it is that they need to do to get there. Those are not your clients. Other people are your clients. People will pay a lot of money for book coaching that does not guarantee any particular publishing outcome when it's around like you getting your ideas out in the world, you're actually finishing the book, you're doing, whatever the things are that you really focus on. Similarly, if you're doing ghostwriting, you need to be thinking, who needs ghostwriting and who's willing to pay a bunch of money for it? Like who really has that need? And what is it about me as a ghostwriter that's different from any other ghostwriter? How can I do it better? How can I do it differently? How can I match up, do something that's going to be like, it's going to actually feed that particular outcome that the person wants. Same thing with a wedding photographer. This person is asking, how do I do this without being all over social media all the time? Good question. But that's not required, especially for higher end stuff. I mean, with wedding photography, you probably need some social media because you need to be showing what you're doing, right? And a lot of this is about status and being able to show your wedding and so on. But, having a local search, dominating local SEO search, because you have a value prop that has to do with your local area and how you're special there, you're different from other people there. Like, how are you different? Like, what is it that you are different about? Do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, I think we covered it pretty thoroughly earlier, but that's a thing that's coming up when looking at all these different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think especially with, I mean, writing, I'm not even going to pretend I know anything about that. But for wedding photography, I mean, there's definitely like a bit of an overlap. I'll say like, I occasionally get clients who have found me on social media, but then they just like, they stalk me for like 6 months and then eventually hire me. So it's not just social media. But I found that when I am at a networking event, the first thing people do when they find out they want to see my work, they flip open Instagram and they're like, put yourself in so that I can sit here and go through your Instagram. So having enough on there, doesn't matter how often you're posting. It's just like a very quick portfolio. They don't want your website. They want your Instagram. They just want to see lots of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Really. So I'd say social media is useful in that sense. Instagram makes a nice portfolio that everyone, and then people can save it, right? They can follow you instantly, know where to find you again. That's how people have been using Instagram for me.
But you've been reducing your Instagram and your social media content marketing a lot. Like you've actually mostly replaced that with this relationship marketing, and you're doing a low ebb of putting out, just every once in a while. So you show up in people's feed and LinkedIn, on Instagram, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I have really, some of that is just like, I don't like social media. And so my own dislike.
Right. But I mean, you don't want to be slave to it no matter what, so even if you do like it, you want to do it on your terms, not based on like what the algorithm tells you.
Yes. My goal is once a week. I don't often hit that goal. I would say that like, every couple weeks, once a month, I like post something new. The world remembers who I am for a moment. Yeah, it hasn't been, no one's paying me $10,000 off of Instagram. Really. That's the end of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And they may need to go to Instagram to go like, oh, this is what I would be getting if I paid $10,000, but they don't need like, it's not a sales technique. It's a sort of research.
Yes. Yeah.
Resource.
Yeah. They use it as research. They use it as a quick way to go through my portfolio to see what the process is like. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to do, I think, 2 more questions if you have time. So Leonie asks, if you're at the bottom of the ladder aiming high, meaning I could think, charging very little, not having a lot of clients, can all of the imperfect action of getting yourself out there be detrimental if it's being seen by those future high paying clients? In other words, how does one parachute in without paying your dues over the years? So I guess it's sort of like balancing this idea of like putting out like low cost stuff and then later wanting to pivot to this higher cost thing. Sort of an interesting question.
Yeah, I always find that one really tricky. Because it is really hard to like just walk in the door with a small portfolio and just getting started and be like, now pay me $15,000. Like that's hard. Maybe finding ways to start doing portraits that take you less time, so you can charge less to build up a portfolio. And like it does start to grow naturally, though. I will say that like my prices have gone up over the years without me even trying to actively strategically do that. People are happy to pay more. Even like people who have started with me at the beginning have grown to a certain extent with my higher prices. I have now made a leap where like, yes, a lot of my previous audience can't afford me. And I knew that was going to happen. And I consciously made that choice. But I think see if there's a way to like make a smaller version of what you want to do that doesn't take you as much time. Your materials are cheaper. You can charge a more entry level, not cheap, but like affordable, more entry level price point. And then see how you can grow that from there. I used to do much smaller pieces. Like my initial portraits were much smaller and took me way less time to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that when you're starting out, going towards a higher end offer, and this is a couple people ask questions about like, how do you get to this higher end offer? How do you do this pricing thing? Like you do start with what we do in the incubators, we call it the MVP, the minimum viable product. And you start with something that's essentially a pilot. You start with something that you're testing the market, you're testing the language you're using, the value proposition, is it compelling? You're doing a little bit of, putting your toes in the water and also getting testimonials, getting information, so that then you can kind of look at this and say, like, is this working for me in this way? For the most part, you get to the end of that and you're like, I need to double my prices. Like that's mostly what happens then. But I've also talked to people who are earlier in their career, they don't have a lot of track record, you know, getting some sort of a few pilot clients through your process, using their testimonials, their referrals to grow from there. It's okay to be undercharging for a while, as long as you recognize that and you're willing to, you know, double, triple your prices later on, when you have the track record that you can stand on, essentially. Yeah.
And one piece of advice I've heard from a lot of other painters and portrait painters is like, you know, do a couple at one price range, and then like the next few put it up like 10 or 15% and see how that works. And then like the next couple put that price up like 10 or 15%. It'll get you to grow in like a more manageable way at the beginning as you're testing everything out and building out that portfolio, because you do need to have like, you know, I would say at least 10 pieces saying like, I can do this consistently. Here's a variety of what I can do.
Right.
So
and let me translate this also to other media, because it's not, this is very true also if you're offering services of some kind, like you need some results. You need to show that you can actually produce the outcomes that you're talking about in your value prop somehow. So you need some clients to run through your process, you know, and if you need to knock down your prices and do a pilot for a while to get a few people through, that's fine. It's fine. I mean, it can be hard to manage in terms of time and having enough money coming in, but it's fine. One danger of doing the 10 to 15% increases is if you start at like $500, you're going to be at like $700 in 4 years, right? You have to at some point look at it holistically and say, what does this really need to be? And not be afraid to make really large jumps, you know. And we talked to you about the idea of like with people who worked with you before, you might give them a little bit of a break, but only to a certain point, because at some point it's going to hurt your ability to make a living.
And I made it clear that like, I will give you a cut this time, but next time, like my prices will be higher, like,
right,
because I have to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. All right. I think we're going to leave it there. Sarah, this was so great. So helpful. Thank you so much for being so honest. I know everybody was really appreciating that. We are going to be back with the Creative Business Design Lab next month on March 8th. My guest will be Samantha Clark, who is an artist, writer, and creative coach who works with both writers and artists on their projects. Sam also launched her business about a year ago. She's filled her roster, raised her prices a couple of times. That'll sound familiar. But at this point, she's realized that the revenue goals she set are too small and they don't actually provide the income she needs for the future that, you know, is really safe and secure. But she doesn't want to just add more clients because it's already feeling like a lot. So we're going to talk next time about what got you here won't get you there. How do you vault to the next level with your creative business? Like, where are those levers where you can move things so that you're not just taking on more work to try to bring in more revenue? And I hope I'll see you there.
Thank you so much. It was really helpful.
So glad. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.